Hi, welcome to the Minnesota Realtors e-video resource. My name is Chris Galler. Today with me is Susan Diori, our Senior Vice President of Risk Reduction and our inside legal counsel. Susan's going to talk to us today about working as a facilitator in the marketplace and what happens when you're representing another party in the transaction. So Susan, why don't you give us an overview of what a facilitator is in a real estate transaction?
Sure, Chris. In our agency relationships options in Minnesota, there are several options, one of which is a facilitator. So you're acting as a facilitator in a default position if you don't have any representation contract. So if you're not acting as a seller's broker, a buyer's broker, or a dual agent, you're going to be, and you're working with a consumer out there, you'd be defaulting to be a facilitator. As a facilitator, important piece about that is that you only have the fiduciary duty of confidentiality unless you have agreed in writing a facilitator services agreement to have any other fiduciary duties.
Okay. And so if I'm in the marketplace, I'm working with a consumer as a facilitator, I'm not representing them.
Right.
And so I don't owe them all the fiduciary duties except confidentiality. Whatever they tell me, I'll remain confident. And I show a listing of my company.
Right, good question.
What happens to that relationship at that point?
Great question. So in our statutes in Minnesota, you are required, Chris, just in your example, if you were working with a buyer as a facilitator, they are looking and interested in a property that your brokerage happens to have listed, not necessarily just you specifically,
right, but
any other agent, salesperson in your office has listed with your brokerage, you actually have to stop acting as a facilitator for that buyer. Okay. The statute requires you to default then to be the seller's broker and represent that seller who's being represented by your brokerage, and you cannot act in that dual capacity in that regard.
Sure. So if I'm holding an open house, whether it's my listing or somebody else in my office or company, and a consumer comes into the open house,
Yep.
am I working with that consumer then as a facilitator?
You will not be working with them as a facilitator. You still have your seller's broker's hat on, right? Your brokerage is representing the seller, presuming the person in the open house is with the brokerage. We are representing the seller in that capacity. In that circumstance, you would certainly want to be providing them with that agency relationships form, and you would want to explain that you are not representing them. You are simply representing the seller.
Right.
Yep.
Good. Anything else on facilitatorship that would be helpful?
Just to point out, you're going to have to default either way. So we had the example of the shifting back to be the seller's broker. It's going to be the same the other way around. So if you were representing the seller and you had a buyer, if you were representing the buyer and they were interested in a property where the seller was not, you were working with the seller as a facilitator, you have to default back to be a buyer's broker.
Good.
So make sure they know it's both ways.
Sounds good. A lot on facilitatorship. We have information on the Minnesota Realtor website that can help you identify that. And next year, you'll all be required to take an agency class. So if you have questions about it, make sure you ask us, www.mnrealtor.com. Thanks for joining us.